Okie dokie. So starting the recording, this presentation is going to be on the observable technology for doing data visualization and other interesting JavaScript animations on the web. My name is Devin Bayly. The pronouns that I use are he, him, and I am going to be getting help, copious help from Alex Bigelow, who is another person. Alex, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm just finished my postdoc from U of A, and I've moved on, and now I'm a software engineer at a company called Stardog. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, so this is great. And my official title is I'm a data and visualization consultant. I work mostly with researchers who are doing things involving the HPC, so like supercomputers, but I do visualization projects of all kinds of scales. So otherwise, let's start sharing the screen. And the first thing that we want to go to, Alex, do you have the link to the HackMD? Yeah, if we can put that in the chat, because honestly, I need that.
That should be in the chat. So yeah.
So the first place that we're going to start is on this page. And there's a little bit of an introduction, which maybe you looked at, and that's why you're here. But otherwise, I'm generally saying we're going to cover this thing called Observable HQ, or I'm just going to say Observable to save time. And it's a relatively new platform for data visualization and so much more. And we are actually going to be doing almost all of our workshop out of a notebook, not with a PowerPoint presentation. And so the link for that is underneath this section called Getting Started Here. And before we go into that, if you would like to, it can be very exciting and helpful to put introductions or information about who you are and why you're at this workshop in the section under introductions. So Alex and I have already filled out our lines, and if you follow our pattern, then it would be so great to see who's with us. And of course, following the format for the ResBaz conference in general, if you have questions, you can either put them into the chat for this workshop, or you can, there's only a couple of us, so you can unmute and you could be like, Devin, what's going on? Or if you are feeling very formal and you want to make sure that there's like a paper trail for your whole question, you can put it in the HackMD, and we will try to answer it in all the places that these questions come up. But speaking of, let me make sure I have my little chat window open, because sometimes I am in a workshop and I'm like firestorming my questions into the chat, and the person, doesn't seem to have that up. So I'll try to keep my eye on this. But yeah, so what we are going to do, if everyone can see my screen, we are going to go straight over to the notebook. So, and I think this will actually get pulled up. Well, I already have it open in the other window, so feel free to click on that link and you should land somewhere over here. And this is maybe your first glance at an observable notebook. I don't know if maybe you're coming in with previous experience, but what we're going to be doing is just sort of exposing ourselves to some of the cooler things that are out there. And then we're going to maybe dive into how we can actually be authors ourselves. And if everyone is on this page, I'm not sure, does everyone have reactions in their Zoom? Can you do like a little check mark if you've managed to come to this page? I see a thumbs up. Any of these work. Excellent, excellent. All right. This is so fun. Never had people who like actually go with those. So, so this is a notebook, and there are many ways to think about notebooks. People in science have lab notebooks, and these are like these holy artifacts that have every detail of their experiment in them. And there are web notebooks for programming, which honestly are a little less holy, and they're more of like these exploration, experimental environments, at least the way I use them. And so Observable is a notebook akin to that latter type. You can do a lot of experimental work inside of these notebooks. And if you've used Jupyter, that is a very, very widely used type of programming notebook. And this is going to be pretty similar. One of the reasons that this is more my favorite kind of thing is it's backed by JavaScript rather than being for Python. And that allows you to put in all of the good things that are on the web that JavaScript provides on its own. So we'll be looking at quite a few examples, but why don't we just get started with the top one here? And so I've done quite a few projects surprisingly for myself in geospatial kinds of work now. And so I have a sweet spot for looking at landscapes. And what I really enjoy, this person, Vladimir Agafonkin, I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right, I'm sorry. He is the developer of this framework called Leaflet, and I use Leaflet all the time. It's like this really great tool for doing geospatial data without having to like know everything about ArcGIS. But he also apparently is really good at making like 3D reconstructions of landscapes. And what I really like about this is that it's interactive. And so he has some actual like height map data of Mount Fuji here. And we can zoom in on it and we can actually pan it around and like look at it from these different angles. And apparently, you know, this entire notebook is talking about this tool that he's created. And what Observable Notebooks allow us to do is use his tool while he's trying to convince us how great it is. And I think that that's a very impressive aspect of how to do data viz. You don't just show slides of it and then hope that people are still impressed when they want to try it for themselves. So this is just one of the examples. I believe we have a couple of different places that we could look at, like the Grand Canyon. As someone who's actually tried to get my hands on some of the landscape data for the Grand Canyon, I'm very impressed that they were able to get the LiDAR height map info for this. So I might actually have to come back to this later and dig a little bit into it. But you might notice also that when we changed our option in here, it wasn't just this square that updated. There were many, many other parts of the notebook that changed. So maybe Alex is going to explain a little bit more about that black magic after we look at a few more of these examples. So let's go back to our original page. And this is a shameless plug for the work of one of my students who I did an independent study with recently. So her name is Abby Collier. Oh my gosh, I didn't spell her name correctly. Let me add the other L. Okay, I'll pretend that this is an example of how easy it is to edit these notebooks instead of me misspelling her name. But she did part of her independent study on data visualization techniques. And so we got our hands on this squirrel census data set. And I don't know if anybody else has looked at this thing, but somebody out there has been counting squirrels in Central Park. And there's all sorts of like aspects to this data, like what their behavior are, where they were spotted. And so we just, started to plot a little bit of information about where they were in the whole park. And it's a whole story. And so here's a little bit of a breakdown of their general colors. Apparently there's a lot more gray squirrels than cinnamon colored squirrels, which maybe, I knew the world was a rough place, but if that had flopped, maybe things would be better. Cinnamon squirrels sound kind of fun. But we can also do things like plot their positions, and all of these have elements of interactivity to them. So we can click and pan and zoom in, and of course we get a nice actual picture of what Central Park looks like, so that this plot down here makes sense. So you can do a heat map of where the squirrels were found. You can actually have it interact with where the mouse is going over. So for those of you who have background in doing plots and visualization, where you're creating stuff for maybe a publication and it's a static image, this is on the other end of the spectrum, where you create something and there's sort of limitless amounts of interactivity that you can do with it. So anyways, that's the squirrel census data set. And in this notebook, we've cited quite a few of the links. If you find yourself in the position where you need to do some data viz on the squirrel census. And so we have a couple of other examples. Just going to click on this one. And this is by none other than our own Alex. Maybe he can unmute and tell us a little bit about this notebook.
Sure. So this was one that I just made for, I spun it up real quick because I needed a figure for a paper, and I wanted a scatter plot matrix, which is a really good way to show relationships between lots of different attributes at the same time. And I didn't want to like bother writing up the code for a scatter plot matrix. So I actually went out and found a notebook that it was essentially this same notebook, but I did a thing called a fork. We'll talk about this in a minute, but I was just able to kind of rip off their code, swap in my own data, and use Observable as just kind of the way to like bring in my own data and like change some of the like styling and labels in this interactive environment. And then I was able to dump this out as an SVG and like drop that into my paper.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about these tools is Observable is getting rather popular, and that means that there are a lot of really clever people coming in and building things, and there's a great mechanism for borrowing and citing other people's work. And some of our workshop is going to be focused exactly on like, how do you do this? If you find somebody's stuff that's really exciting, how do you actually incorporate it into your own work? So, and I think there's one last example. So this was my own attempt at creating a observable notebook for Dr. Kate Isaac's Vega Light ResBaz workshop, which happened earlier in this week. And so if you were at that workshop, some of these plots might look familiar to you. I've actually gotten her data and then brought it in. And in this actual notebook, we're able to recreate some of the things that Kate was doing just on a single page with HTML and the Vega embed or Vega Light API. So Chinmay is asking, how does this differ from R Markdown or R Shiny dashboards? So a lot of these technologies are very similar to each other. The first thing that's the most different about this is it's not R, which maybe that's the easy answer. But one of the big differences is that you can, I mean, there are a lot of very close similarities. Like you can put in prose, so you can have text that explains what your code is doing at different parts. I think R Shiny tends to be a thing that you need to have like a license for, or you have to limit the size of your application to some degree. Maybe Jeff Oliver can explain some more about this because he did the R Shiny workshop. But I think really one of the other big differences is that forking aspect. I haven't done a whole lot with R Shiny or R Markdown, but I don't know if there's necessarily a way to import other people's work so handily. But if you have experience with that, and when we show you the forking mechanism, if you're like, this is totally the same, then feel free to tell me and we'll both learn something as a process. Did I get that question taken care of?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, totally. So good to see you, Chinmay, after all the work getting Zoom stuff set up. All right, so that was the last of these notebooks. And I don't know if any of you were adventurous enough to try to like type anything into these notebooks and see if you can actually change them, but you're able to completely like smash and grab, or that's a more violent reference. You can modify and extend in whatever direction you really want. So you could say something like, ooh, this is cool. And of course, these changes are live right now. They're not going to be in the notebook if you reloaded the page, but we'll cover stuff later on about how you can persist your changes and how you can make notebooks for yourself. But what's really nice is if you're just trying to work out how somebody else did something, you can go in and start to play with it. And I think the most important part of how to learn technologies these days is trying something, sort of the stochastic process of like, okay, I did something, what was the result? And so anyways, those are our big, beautiful examples to look at. But now why don't we experiment with doing some modifications of our own? And so I created sort of a sandbox for us to play in. And if all of you will follow my lead on this, we will get started on how to change the notebook's contents. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Alex. So we're going to experiment with temporary modifications. And I'm just reading the note that I gave to myself. Yes, it's important in this process to understand how you actually evaluate code. So there are a couple hotkeys. You can press Control Enter or Shift Enter to actually run the code that's part of one of these cells, as we call them. If you're from the Jupyter Notebook world, the cell terminology is going to be very similar. Otherwise, there are quite a few different ways to actually run the code. They've changed the user interface like a lot right before this workshop. So there used to be a little play button that you could also click on, but I think that that's not that anymore. Oh, probably down here. Yeah, sorry. So this is like, it shows the display or the output of your code above where the code lives. And so you see that this is sort of a gray background and there's a little play button in there. So that's another way to execute the code. But let's just open up this experiment one and we can try these changes. So there's two little exercises in here, and honestly, you could take this and run for quite a while. But I'm giving you the simple task of changing the color in this notebook from what is my personal favorite color, purple, to whatever is your personal favorite color. And so the way that you might do that, just sort of lead by example, is you would delete this area in between quotations that says purple. and you would type in something like blue. Now, I said there's a couple of options for executing the contents of this cell. You can click on the play button, or you can do Control Enter or Shift Enter. You can do this one. And now you'll notice that a few different things have actually updated to show our changes. So can folks give me a thumbs up or a check mark if they managed to get to this page and change the color?
Where's the exercise? I couldn't find it.
Oh, the exercise is under, it's also possible that I need to make this absolutely public, but that would be an important thing, you know, if I'm trying to actually share this with people. Looks like it is this link. I think Alex might have put it in the chat, but let us know if you have more trouble coming to the exercises page using the link that's in the Zoom chat. Yay! All right, and sorry, I didn't see if other people were having trouble, but I see a thumbs up from Austin. And oh yay, more people showed up. Woo! Yeah, so it's exciting. You can change the color as many times as you want. It could be yellow. Yellow is kind of intense on screens. I don't know how you feel about that. But I'm going to go back to purple. And of course, all of this is using some understanding of JavaScript. Right now, this is a JavaScript string. We're doing something that's a lot like variable assignment here, but it's not absolutely like variable assignment because as anybody who's used Observable for more than like 20 minutes will find out, Observable's JavaScript is not really normal JavaScript. But for our purposes in this workshop, we're not going to dive into all of the intricacies of that, but you can assume that this is sort of like an assignment to a variable that happens in JavaScript or many other programming languages. So that was probably a pretty small example. But one thing that is important to understand is I've actually sort of hidden the code, made this a notebook that's really good for displaying, but you can show the code for the thing that's producing this big block of purple or this animation down beneath. And the way that you can do that is you see this little caret that's on the left side of any of these cell displays. If you click on it, you'll see the code that I'm using to actually generate that. This all is modifiable as well. And so you can, instead of having a height of 200, you could have a height of 20. And so this will become very, very thin. Or you could have a height of 2000 and it becomes a much, much taller thing. So these are all modifications that you can make to my code or any notebook's code that you find in the process of exploring Observable. And if you're very curious about this animation, you can open it up like any other cell. And you can see the result that's in here. I'm actually using what's known as P5. And P5 is a creative coding library for JavaScript. It's based off of processing, which is a Java library for creative code. I strongly recommend it if you're looking to like kill some time, but still mess around with programming things. It's just really fun to like play around with. I'm gonna see what's going on in the chat. And Alex is saying that
if anyone's having trouble running or making changes to a notebook and running it, it's possible that Devin and I are both logged in and it's doing different things for us. So
yeah,
yeah, if there are problems, let us know because we should fix that if
yeah,
that's not working for anybody.
Can we troubleshoot that live? Is anybody experiencing that? Ah, Kiri can change the color. Okay, well then let me, again, like they did this thing recently where they allowed in-depth amounts of collaboration. Okay, and Diane says, she's not seeing the drop-down arrow in Chrome, but can still click on the left to see the code. Okay, so like just in the left anywhere will open up the code, I see. I'm glad that there's an alternative. And Austin's able to make changes. What could be happening, I'm gonna open up a second private window so that it doesn't have me logged in as anybody. And I'm gonna try opening up this notebook and we can see what goes on. Because I would love to get Kiri up to speed on this because this is great stuff. So, all right, so I'm gonna try to change it to red. It's possible that you didn't execute the cell, Kiri. but I don't know. Has anything changed for you yet?
No, it just doesn't, like if I go to the code and try and change the color, it doesn't like let me click in there.
Oh, weird. What browser are you in?
I'm in Chrome.
Okay. I mean, I should also just double check that that's like a thing that I can see working in Chrome. And honestly, like we built a lot of time into like stopping and working over issues with people. So don't feel like we're stalled out or anything like that. This is what we want to do with our time, actually. Because honestly, I think it's like this dirty secret in programming that nobody wants to talk about how much time is actually spent in the failed state. So I think we got to sort of normalize this. I have to record this video of us working on this. So, because we need to acknowledge that it happens. So I can't tell if okay, so it doesn't think I'm signed in right now. And, oh, I think Diane is pointing out exactly it. So Kiri, you might notice, okay, when I reload this notebook, you might notice that there are these two lines on top of each other. One of them has like a gray background and one of them has a white background.
Yeah.
You can't change the code that's in this white background area. This is like the display part. Is this where you were trying to change it?
Yep.
Okay, woo! Because if you change it down here, it should work.
Sorry.
No worries. That's something that I like pretty much glossed over.
Got it. Well, I heard you just say like, oh, the code is actually below what? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so so there's something about observable that I didn't really explain like right at the beginning is they separate the result of a code cell and the code itself into these two different sections. And they totally flip, and for whatever reason they decided to do this, the mechanic that is in almost all other notebook programs where you have your code above and the result is underneath, like cause and effect, like top to bottom, the flow. And observable is like, no, no, no. We're going to have code underneath and the result above. And that has caused no end of problems in my life. And I don't know if it's just because they wanted to give people the option to hide the code and keep the display in like the same spot. You notice that there's this little pin where I took the pin off. And so if I go to a different area, my code disappears to make it like easier for people to read. But honestly, it was a weird choice. And I'm teaching this workshop and I don't want that to tell or to make anyone think that I'm like absolutely convinced that this is the best tool in the universe. I see the problems and I will talk to you about them. But in the same way, this big red box is sort of the same display that this line of code is here, or like it's the result of this line of code. So anyways, glad that you can make the changes, Kiri. That is an important thing for the rest of this workshop. And so let's see, I guess I was messing around a little bit with data that's associated with Netflix titles. I guess I didn't use that anywhere, but keep that there. Let's move on to exercise 2. And in this exercise, we're going to change something. And then after it, I'm going to let Alex talk a little bit about why it is other parts of the notebook change if we change only one area. So in here, we have the numbers in between these square braces, 0 through 19. So we kind of have 20 of these numbers. And I want you to modify these numbers in some fashion. I'm going to be kind of intense and I'm going to delete all the numbers that are bigger than 6. And then I'm going to rerun this cell. And you'll notice that a few different areas changed. So we see that underneath there are these sections that are actually telling us something. The sum of this list of numbers is, well, that doesn't seem right. I think it would be more accurate to say average of these numbers.
Mean. Be very mean.
All right. Perfect. And so what you can see is that we are actually using a piece of data here in a totally different area, the cell down here, and we're actually making it part of this message that gets displayed to us. So there's something about reactivity that we should pause and talk about. And will you take it away, Alex?
Sure. So I don't know if I want to make you change screens. So I just dropped a link in the chat that you can pull up like 3 figures and we can scroll past them and then go back to you.
Yeah.
So this is once again a notebook. This is like Observable's documentation. And so one of the weirdest things, and we just read into this with the like, where is the code that's getting run? Observable doesn't run code in kind of like the top-down order that you usually get in something like Jupyter Notebook. Instead, what Observable does is anytime you create a variable or like anytime you create a cell, it's like a node in this graph. And behind the scenes, Observable is building this graph of connections and dependencies. And so it says, oh, I know you've got this visualization down here that references variable color equals green somewhere else. And so wherever that is, above or below, Observable will make that connection and that dependency. And so you can kind of scroll down a little bit. There's an animated version of this where they're just kind of showing like the first time you run a notebook, the order that it goes in is it looks at like, well, what doesn't have any dependencies? When you make a variable, oh, my color equals red, that doesn't depend on anything. So it can do that first. And then if you go down to and then it kind of like evaluates down the graph. And then that last bit is if you decide that, oh, now I want to go and change, like back when we changed that color, Observable doesn't rerun everything. It just notices, oh, you changed this color. I notice there's these 5 other things that depend on that color. I'm going to rerun those cells and leave everything else alone. So that's kind of a sense for what's going on behind the scenes when Observable reruns stuff in your notebook. And that's pretty much it for me.
Great. Well, thank you, Alex. Yeah, and I will mention first and foremost that you can still use Observable without understanding 100% all of that. It'll be one of these things that you'll be surprised about a couple of times as you go along, and you'll sort of learn more each time that you get caught a little off guard. And they have all these little pieces of documentation that are actually live notebooks that should help, in theory, get you to an understanding of how Observable is working under the hood. So let me close that one.
Question.
Yeah.
So I noticed that when I was changing the numbers, I'm not actually changing the code. I'm just changing the output. Is that the case? So
good question.
Yeah. So do I really need to know any code?
That's a really good question. So in some ways, a notebook that's already been written for you is like an interface. It's like you're using a program that you don't have to write the code for. Like you would just change some numbers here and some numbers there, or like move a slider here or there. So you wouldn't need to use code in a lot of cases if the notebook was really, really well written. But if you were the one making the notebook, you would need to know a little bit about the information. And I think maybe John's link. John, is your link in response to Chinmai's question?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can kind of get away with a lot of this. Like there are elements like sliders and things like that that will actually trigger changes in the notebook somewhere else. And so you won't, I mean, in some people's examples using their notebooks, you don't actually have to reinvent or write any JavaScript necessarily, which is pretty cool.
Okay, so I don't know any Java. So how do I go about creating a new notebook?
Well, we will get there. I'm glad that you're like, I'm so ready. Let's go already. So
yeah, thanks John for sharing the link.
No worries. So that was a little bit of our experiment of doing temporary modifications. I also put in the second point under temporary modifications to open up the user manual. This is just you should keep this in the back of your, or put it in your back pocket and use this all the time. What's really nice is I find myself repeatedly going back to the 5-minute introduction and the tutorial, simply because on both of these pages, you can actually change the code that's in here, and you can mess around with stuff. They have the color is red and changing the color in a couple of different places as well. But instead of just doing a bunch more examples of like modifying other people's notebooks, which I think you will probably have a lot of time to play around with after the workshop, why don't we do a little bit of maybe not starting from very, very scratch, but we're gonna do what Alex was talking about. We're gonna work on forking and what I call the fork and extend workflow. So I think this was a link to the actual notebook we were looking at here. And we are now going to go up to the top and click on these 3 dots. And I'm right now assuming that people have signed in using some sort of either a Gmail or a GitHub. And I think you can't fork without that. But that's also something that you could try. But yeah, so the button would be here. And this will actually open up. We choose which account we want to actually create the fork for. And we get the same notebook, but now this is our own version. So changes to it, if we reload the page, will still be there. So yeah, let me make sure that everyone's logged in. And so give me a check mark or a thumbs up if you're all good. Yeah, or thumbs up and a check mark. This is great. Someone is like totally ready.
Oh, you know, I think I've used Observable before. I went right into it. I actually have some stuff in there already.
You're like, hey, I've seen this.
Yeah. I think I thought it was like a rather neat thing because for wrangling D3 compared to, you know, like using just or other approaches. I mean, I've seen people live coding D3 before, and it gets a little painful after a while.
Yeah. I personally, I still feel like D3 can be a little painful no matter what tool you're using to wrangle. But maybe I still haven't just used it for enough decades. But maybe Alex can also say like whether he thinks Observable is like the right place to be doing stuff with D3.
Yeah, well, so like that scatter plot matrix I had up earlier, especially if you need just like a one-off visualization of, oh, I need to make a thing for a paper, it's a great place for it. I can go steal the scatter plot matrix code from somebody else, just swap in my data, maybe tweak the D3 code a little bit. I don't even have to understand the whole. In fact, I think when I worked on that, I didn't even totally understand how they were drawing all of it. But I just needed to change some colors. So it's a good for like a lot of one-off things. If you're doing like a dedicated system or something, then yeah, Observable is not gonna be the best. But for a lot of like quick things, it's great.
Yeah. And what I also really enjoy about Observable is for the cells that have displays, if you have a static or an animated thing, you can often click on it, these little 3 dots that are over to the left, and you get options for downloading a PNG if it's a raster display, or you can download an SVG, something that you can resize sort of to infinity for your poster or for your publication. So that's all pretty cool stuff. Okay, so I am gonna move on, assuming that people have worked out a way to log in, or they are going to ask themselves and probe deeply the question of like whether they want to log in at a later point in time, which is totally valid because I don't really like registering for 10,000 different things. So here we go. But if you've done that, you're going to come into this example experimenting with modifications notebook and click on the fork button when you've selected the 3 dots that are up in the top right. And I already did that, so I probably shouldn't fork again because otherwise you will wind up with forks to infinity. And the way that you can kind of see if you've already done that is there's this little icon up here that looks like at least a fork in the GitHub repo tree. And it'll say fork of another notebook, which is nice. So when we're in here, we can start probing how much JavaScript we know. And honestly, like I was saying, maybe in response to Chimay, you can not know a ton of JavaScript and you can play a little bit with typing in values. If your background is in R or if your background is in Python, there are certain things that you can get away with trying, and you can learn sort of as a result of like what your modifications are. So if you are here with me, I should mention how it is that we're actually going to put a new cell into the notebook. We have a couple of different ways. They give you all these methods to do it with a mouse or to do it with hotkeys, and so I'll talk about both. As you move down between all these different cells, you'll see that there's usually a plus at the top and the bottom of each of the cells. So if you click on that plus, it'll give you a new cell either above or below the one that you were just highlighting. And what's nice is they recently updated the interface. Something that I didn't really enjoy before was that in order to type out like Markdown or HTML content, I had to write a little bit more code than I wanted, but now you actually have these types. So let's get into adding content very slowly and select a Markdown cell. And we're going to say, here begins the rest of our observable lives. And there's the nice big display, sort of suggesting that we're going to create more content underneath this. So all of the Markdown rules that you might have been enjoying in the HackMD for the ResBaz conference apply here as well inside of Markdown cells, which is pretty neat. Perhaps with the exception of things that HackMD has built in to support, like pasting images in there. That might not be something that you can do here, but I haven't really tried. So if we want to create a cell underneath this one without clicking on the plus button, again, we have these two different ways to evaluate a cell, either with Control Enter or Shift Enter. I believe if you do Shift Enter, you evaluate the cell, but your cursor stays in the same cell. If you do Control Enter, it will run your cell and then move you to a cell underneath. On a Mac, I believe you would use the Command and Enter or the Shift and Enter keys. But yeah, let me know if that doesn't work. Okay, Shift Enter, and is the Command button doing something? Command should move you on to the next. Cool. Thank you, Alex. Great questions, everybody. I feel alive in a workshop when people are asking me stuff. So how did I enter the text? So you see my cursor is blinking down here. I went over and clicked on the Markdown option. And then I was able to type in this # means like the biggest header that you can create in a Markdown file. If I put multiples of them, I get smaller headers. So this is a slightly smaller. And then I just type. Okay, what if you're not seeing the JS and Markdown buttons? Good question, Diane. Let me make sure that I got Chinmaya's question answered. Oh, same question. Great. So if you're not seeing those things, as in like you might have already started typing some stuff and the options go away, I think you can click outside of that cell. Here it is. Yeah. So I just typed all that gobbledygook, and now I don't have these JavaScript or Markdown things over to the right, but you do see that there's this little curly brace thing in the gray over to the left. And if you hover on it long enough, it says set mode. If you click on it, it will open up the mode that you are currently in, or you can change it to a different mode. Did that work for the two of you? Not seeing the parentheses to the left. All right. This is a big issue. All right, thanks everyone for stopping at this spot. Is anybody else able to screen share? I can't remember if we have the permissions set up for that, because it would be very helpful if someone experiencing it, I'll stop mine. So I think, Chinmay, you might be the perfect person because you also are a co-host, right?
Yeah.
Would you be able to screen share?
Yeah, sure. Can you see the screen?
I can.
Okay, so this is where I typed this #header.
Yeah. So I think I know what's going on already. So Observable is this rapidly developing tool. They now have changed a bunch of these things in the user interface. And so they've developed classic mode and next mode. And I think what I'm seeing is that your notebook didn't automatically start in next mode. And so I am going to try to back mine up to classic, and I can see if there's a way that I can show you how to move it to next. Because what I don't want to do is explain the method that I really didn't like before about how you can type in Markdown stuff. So
okay.
Let me reshare my screen. Thank you for that reminder, Diane. I do that in my meetings all the time. I'm like, this thing in the graph that I'm talking about, and they're like, I don't see that graph. Okay, so now I'm back to classic mode. And the same issue of not being able to see like a little curly brace down here is going on, right? So for me, they have this funny little like get the new observable button down here, which is kind of helpful, but it's also a little pushy. Like, come on, move along already. I'm not really a fan of them telling us to do that. But if we go back up to the top, all of you who are experiencing this, let me know if when you click these 3 dots in the top right corner, if there's an option at the very bottom of the pop-out list that says switch to next. And if you don't see that option, please tell me in the text or in the chat.
Oh yeah, now I could see the markdown and those options when I clicked on next.
Awesome. That's so weird that it, if they really want people to be converting, they shouldn't start you in classic. All right. So, okay, Austin works great. And is it working for you, Diane and Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Devin. Now we see everything that you showed before.
Super. All right. Okay, so I should catch up. I'll switch to next and evolve with the rest of you. So we had written a couple of markdown cells, but I was now going to throw us into the deep end of a JavaScript cell. So without going into the gory details of how much observable JavaScript is different, we are just going to briefly create a variable like I had above with color. So go ahead and type something like name equals, and then use parentheses and type your name. And you have to have a JavaScript cell active for that. But once you've done that, you can make another cell underneath, and we're going to bounce back into the waters of Markdown. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a template display, and we're going to use that variable name to display whatever we set it to. And so this is going to be a little bit funky. So actually, yeah, how have I been doing that with their new system? Well, let's do this. So I know I mentioned that they had this previous way of letting you create markdown cells, which I wasn't a huge fan of. You would have to write MD and then the backtick character. And backticks in JavaScript are used for templated strings where you can write text and then have sections that are filled out with a variable and you use the name. So if I wanted to use the name variable, I would have to do $sign and 2 curly braces around it. So then I could say something like this. And don't forget to close your backtick. Oh, interesting. I think we just helped me learn something. So I don't need that part in order to do a markdown evaluated JavaScript template variable. So you can just use $sign curly brace and then any of the JavaScript variables from anywhere else in your notebook. So that's pretty handy. And again, like this isn't something that you need to know JavaScript for. You just put something in there. Can I increase the font size? Yeah, definitely. Sorry about that. How's that?
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Yep. So this is where I've been typing. Yeah, because the curly braces, when I'm zoomed out really far, kind of look like all other braces. So, but of course, if we changed my name up here to include Bayly, it will update where I am putting that into a display down lower in the notebook. And this goes back to Alex's idea of how we have a dependency in this display notebook on this variable name, which is defined up here. So when this part changes, it looks through our little web of intrigue and it says, oh, that other part needs to change too. So, so that's pretty basic stuff. So if you came in with like a super big background in JavaScript, you might be interested in this other way of typing JavaScript commands or cells. you have to put curly braces at the top and the bottom of the whole cell if you want to write multiple lines of normal JavaScript. And when I say normal JavaScript, I mean things like using the variable or the keyword let to define your variable names, equals. And you also need to return things out of your curly braced cells. So if you have like a section where you have to do some logic, or if you have some conditionals that relate to how you're running your code, you would need to put them inside of curly braces. So, and again, like in the observable manual, which I will show you another really great way to get to it, you go up to the top right corner where you see this question mark, click on help. And then the user manual is a great place to go back to if you're like, how is it that I put in those multi-line commands for JavaScript? And then of course, down lower, they'll explain like, this is what's different about observable. So that will help to explain some of that stuff. So briefly, let me explain the difference between these two variable declarations. This up here in observable speak is called a named cell, as in the variable that we have provided. I guess it's an unfortunate example because I'm actually using a variable called name. So the word name is getting thrown around for a lot of things. But if I had a different one that was like, oh, well, example being up here, this is a named cell and the name of the cell is color. And this variable can be used in all these other places, like these two areas where we're creating an animation with it, or we're using it for D3 code. But what's pretty nifty is that those named variables can actually be used in other notebooks in the way that Alex was forking or using other people's stuff. And I think I'm jumping a little bit, but we'll talk about that at the importing code section. So let me make sure that we finish this part about forking. So we've made a couple of modifications. And so if we scroll back up to the top of the page, oh, sorry. If you hadn't forked before you made these modifications, you would see a little message that says something like, you have so many changes that are not going to be persisted in a save. Do you want to fork? So if I added a bunch of numbers in here, you see this little message come up that says one unsaved change, and it gives you the option to fork the notebook. So in my workshop notebook, I'm saying this is something that you might see. You have some number of unsaved changes and it might tell you to fork. That's another way that forking can happen. So that's this section. Does anyone have any questions about the forking before I move along? We'll be attaching custom data. Yeah, go for it, Jimmy.
So what is forking? Like, is it like creating different versions?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Have you used Git and GitHub before?
No.
Okay, so if you're just thinking about a single file, like your different version might be, like if you had an R script, you write R stuff, right, Chinmay?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you had your R program and on one day you were like, I'm feeling kind of risky, I'm gonna make these changes, but I want to name it like the test version. You would copy it and then you would modify it and you would probably change the name of it. That is what we're calling a fork here, because you might continue making changes to that risky set of files. And then after things like explode, you're like, wait a minute, I want to come back to this spot and like go back to where things were safe. So forking allows you to sort of keep a chain of copies or a chain of versions, as you say. And that's a good way to think about it.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. Does anyone else have any quick questions before we do some custom data attaching? I'm gonna take this moment to actually wet my whistle. Does anyone say that anymore? Nobody has whistles.
Devin, you might mention that the really important thing about forking is that it gives you a copy of something that someone else owns.
Absolutely. Yeah. So right now, perfect point, Tom. I was using my own notebook, but let's go to the big, wide discover section of Observable under this Explorer button, if I can successfully click on things. So when you first come to Observable, if you're not part of a workshop like I am teaching, you'll land on this homepage and they have a bunch of like staff, picks, or what are the most liked is usually somewhere I like come and hang out. And I'm a sucker for creative coding. So I might come to this notebook. And as Tom is saying, I might want to give myself a copy. And this is exactly what Alex did for the Bechdel test notebook. So I might fork it. And then from here on, I can start from where they are. Like I might say, oh, this is really cool, except that I'm a fan of using a lot more. I want my radii to be much smaller. So like I can come in here and I can play with the values, or I could go to like another one of their really cool notebooks and you kind of get lost. Like it's really hard to pull back on like a forking frenzy. So might say, oh, this is really cool. What would happen if I just like updated this value to be like probably much too high because these all look like they're normalized. Okay, did something different. That's pretty neat. And of course, one of the most important things of forking is when you have different data than the notebook that it was created with. So speaking of, if I'm allowed to like make a forced transition, how do we get data into our notebooks? So I'm guessing just looking at most of the folks in here, the ones that I know you have data. I know you've got it. So we could, use yours. If you don't have any data to use in an example here, I created a CSV link using the Netflix titles. And oh, that's where they were coming from in my little example notebook. That's why there was Netflix data in there. All right, sorry, that was an aside. Let me make sure my chat is still open. A forking frenzy, yes, very dangerous. So let's see. Yeah, go ahead and click on this if you want to follow my example for adding data to a notebook. And recently, Firefox also did some weird stuff where you no longer get like an option to download the CSV first. It displays it to you, which just seems kind of weird to me. So go ahead and download it. And then in your forked notebook, which I guess I probably have one. We're going to go over to the left side. You see this paperclip. And paperclip, I guess, is the universal sign for attachments. And I don't know. I think it should be like a bottle of glue, right? Or like, anyways, gives you an option to upload stuff. And you would click on this and you would find your Netflix CSV file or whatever CSV that you're using. I'm talking about CSVs. It could be any kind of file. It could be an image. It could be maybe a zip file. I don't really know if you can pull that off. That might be fun to explore in like the second half of our time. We're actually chugging along. I was expecting us to be sort of done at 4 o'clock and then everybody want to scramble, but maybe I'm just rambling. So go ahead and click upload and it'll tell you your progress. You'll see that it's actually going to update an existing file for me, but if your notebook didn't already have this data in it, it would get listed here. So speaking of version control things, like Chinmay was asking, your files that you upload are also sorted versioned, I believe. That might be a lie. I think I've seen times where if you upload the same file, it adds, like it appends, yeah, a number 1 or like an @1 to it. So, and I haven't really pushed the limits here in terms of, do they mean 50 megabytes for a single file, or do they mean 50 megabytes for all your files in total? But if you are like a power user and if you like transfer your Google Photos album to like an observable notebook, you can let me know if that works. So All right, so did everyone who was trying it manage to upload a CSV of some sort to their forked observable notebook? Cool, see thumbs, excellent. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, lots of thumbs. Alrighty, and Kiri's working on it. So while that's happening, I will just briefly show you one of the ways that you can get your data into the notebook. So let's pretend this line doesn't exist. We have our files here listed. There is a really handy just insert into notebook, which is this icon. And it will actually take whatever cell you're sitting on, and it will fill it with pre-written code for you. They have this funky little function here called file attachment. And then you can see that the argument that it takes is the name of the file that it assigned when you uploaded it. And it's nice that it can actually tell for a CSV that it was a CSV file. And so if I run this, we will actually get a representation in JavaScript of our data. So like a CSV being columns and rows, you can see that in our object notation, each of those columns comes before a colon, and then after it is the value that's in there. And so this is honestly the format that I find the most familiar for putting into D3 if you're going to make some graphs of things. But if you were thinking about the other alternatives and just wanted to see what would happen, you can delete that .csv and see that it's just going to give you a sort of object of the actual file attachment. So you have to say what type of thing you want that file attachment to get converted into to use in your notebook. So if you wanted to do all the hard work of parsing the text yourself, or if your data is not like a CSV that can be broken apart, you might use .text, and then your screen will explode. So we've got a lot of Netflix data. I should have thought about that. Okay, let's close this. Hide that display. Another one of the things that suppose I haven't learned in Observable is how to pull yourself back from the brink of like a computer meltdown when you open too much text. So, but CSV is a good way to go. So that's one way to attach the data. I'm thinking of, does anyone have any examples of different data types that they're trying to put into their notebook? Feel free to unmute or type it into the chat. Is this my watch list? I can't tell. It doesn't have enough Lucifer on it. We've been watching a lot of Jerry Bruckheimer. Oh, GeoJSON. Beautiful. That's a great file example. So let's actually go up here and let's search for notebooks that involve GeoJSON, because it would be really cool to just sort of see how people are using this. So this one doesn't look like it actually has any files associated with it. If there were, you would see a little paperclip sign attached to the top. And let's see. But yeah, I think what's interesting about GeoJSON is it is a JSON file. And so the way that we would open it or tell the file attachment system how to parse it is using, instead of .csv, just .json with the parentheses that follow it. Maybe this one will actually have some. Yeah, one file is attached. And it looks like we can actually submit other ones to have them be displayable. Okay, so let's download this for ourselves and double check that this actually looks like a GeoJSON file. Oops, I said to open that in VS Code. That's going to be weird. I'm not used to working in Windows. Is it obvious? I'm drowning. How do I get out of this? Let's close. Let's do this one more time. Save the file. Don't open it. to open this. Yeah, so most GeoJSON files have these sort of nested things where there's features, and the features are usually what we're drawing on the maps. And so this one looks like it's a big old polygon, and it's going to be made up of a bunch of different two-dimensional points that we're going to probably draw lines between. But in terms of Kiri's case of using the GeoJSON file, if we uploaded that to our example notebook, just let me catch up with myself. Here we go. We can actually see if it's going to know exactly how to bring it in that insert into notebook button. That would be really cool. And then I think programs like Leaflet will be able to sort of take it from there. You know, if you know how to use your GeoJSON in terms of those JavaScript libraries, then yeah, here we go. So countries land.json, instead of CSV, we have JSON. And there we are. There's those features that we saw in Firefox like a minute ago. So, all right, that's attaching data. If anybody has any like wild ones where they're like, I bet Devin can't attach that one, ha ha ha, feel free to send them to me and like can make it a sport. But I bet we can also use our time in different ways. So let me move on. Yeah, so here's the exciting part, importing code. This is the subject that has no end. Like there are so many ways you can do this because JavaScript is kind of a crazy library or crazy programming language, and people write their code in all different ways, and there are lots of package managers. But let's talk about a few of them. The first and foremost, most simple, is using this word called require, and then the name of the JavaScript library that you're trying to bring in. So if you're trying to use stuff with D3, you would do require D3, and I think at the very bottom of this notebook, or the other one over, really should just keep that one open. You will see me actually doing that. So down here in the code here, I have written require D3, but I've also set D3 to be equal to it because I want to create a way to use D3 from other cells in my notebook. So that's number one way to do it. This other method is what I used in the Kate Isaac Vega Lite notebook, where you say import and then the name of that library or the name of the variable that you're going to associate with the library. This stuff is fairly complex. So I don't honestly feel like this is a strong choice about how they've done things in Observable. So we are going to, especially this third option, like if you have a JavaScript file that has your data in it, you have to do some crazy stuff. You have to import it, and you have to, since it's like an asynchronous thing where your data is associated, you have to wait so that you know it actually is finished loading before you actually assign it to the data variable. Don't worry about that. There are things that you can use to troubleshoot imports. These links are very useful. But let's just focus for a moment on importing our stuff from other notebooks, because this is the most similar to forking, and it's probably the thing we'll get the most benefit from in the near term. So of course, they have a whole notebook to explain this process. And it's not a bad idea to look through this one. But what they're sort of showing you is the pattern that you're going to follow is you use the word import and then some curly braces around the named cell. You remember that phrase from the notebook that we are bringing in, and then the actual link to that notebook. And this at part is going to be whatever your username is. So for me, that's Devin Bayly. For Mike Bostock, it's M Bostock. And then this is the name of the notebook. And so if you want to see this live, I'm doing a little example here. So you might recognize this pinwheel from our example, or our modifications example. And since I didn't fully publish that, or at least at the time that I wrote this workshop notebook, I didn't fully publish it. I just copied the string of digits that came afterwards. So let me show you what I mean. So you recognize these numbers, the 3FC, 63E, 2B, all that stuff. I took that from the link when we were looking at this, copied, and then came down here and wrote out this sentence. And it's a little more complicated because we threw in this extra special, like using the with comment. But let me show you what this would look like without that. So import P5 pinwheel. And then you probably have to put this in parentheses. And of course, it's going to say, wait a minute, you've already got this somewhere. So in this example in particular is, it's going to be a little bit weird because you remember that in the other notebook, this one was defined as, I guess, we might have set blue. Did it start off as blue? No, it started off as red. But we can also set the variable to be color, whatever our choice was. And that's what the previous line here was doing. So if we have somewhere in our notebook a color that is supposed to be, like if I want it to be purple, we can use with, and then we can declare it like that. So this part is a little bit more complicated, but in the introduction to exports, they have a very nice sort of way of saying, this is how you would do this. So does anybody have any quick questions or want to try out an import that's different from what I just showed? Imports are rough, I understand.
Without digging into the documentation, where do the attached files live, and where can I import from? Where's my code running? Is it running in my browser?
Yeah, so right now this is all client side. That's a big difference between Observable and Jupyter Notebooks, is that Jupyter, usually you have to start what's known as the Jupyter server, or the thing that's running a kernel for your Jupyter notebook. And then in your browser, you simply have this sort of interface that communicates with the kernel, and you write code in the browser and it sends it to the kernel to evaluate it, and it sends the results back. But since Observable, its notebook is in JavaScript, it runs inside the browser here on your machine. So where it's running is with you. And those files, though, are being probably attached to the Observable server, so that when you reload your notebook, you can actually still have access to those files. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, so it's sharing the files from the Observable server. I suppose I could just like watch its trace on my browser and see what's happening there.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you pull up the inspector or something. I will, maybe I'll let everyone in on this thing again, because I like talking about the aspects of it that sort of frustrate me. Since Observable moved on from Classic to Next, they were really pushing this thing, which is collaborative editing. And I think that will probably be the next thing that Alex and I try, is this collaborative experiment with everyone who's in the workshop right now. But you can see here on the right side of my screen in the actual inspector console, the screen is just full of these messages ping-ponging around that are like, the client says this, the worker thread is doing this. And honestly, when you're writing JavaScript code, a lot of the time you want to be printing out your valuables or variables and console logging things. And it's impossible to like catch your message in here. So I'm not a fan of how the next version is like really polluted the console space. Yeah, but you're right, John, that if you were curious about viewing, where your files are, you could watch the network tab. But let me see. So that was the import stuff. And now I'm just briefly going to talk about making a new notebook. This is essentially the same process as forking, except that you start with nothing in there. And then I'll briefly touch on publishing before we do a time check and feel how people are doing and whether there are any subjects they would really like me to focus on. So here we go. So we're going to look out for this new button. When we click on the three dots that are up at the top, nope, sorry, not the three dots, all the way up at the top of the page. So scroll all the way to the top, and by the picture that's next to your name, you'll see a little make a new notebook button. And then look at this, tabula rasa. Like, could go anywhere. yeah, like there's a lot of pressure. Like, what are you going to do in this notebook? All right, let's do some reframing. But in this case, you would be, open to add in whatever JavaScript cells you were going to put in. If you had data that you were going to attach, you'd go through the same process of like coming over here, uploading, and then attaching it using the mechanism that we talked about. And it's probably worthwhile to say something like put data equals before your file attachment, so that somewhere else you could say my data is made up of these things. So trying to decide if I want to go into like a full-blown GeoJSON example. Let's just return a map over this, over the features. And I think features is containing, properties usually have the more interesting stuff in it. So whatever this data is related to, let's get this code out of the properties. So here we have stuff like we've effectively used our data variable after we had named it here as a named cell. So this is what you could do in a new notebook. But if you made some crazy beautiful thing, you might feel like you want to share it with the world. You have a couple of options. So right now, you can still import and use this notebook from other notebooks if you follow the mechanism that I was talking about, where this is sort of the title of your notebook right now, this string of numbers and letters. But should you choose to make this a public notebook, you can actually have your pick of the names that are available. So I hope I delete this later. Otherwise, what was I doing? What was this notebook for? And now you might recognize that in the introduction to imports, we have this embossed color ramp. This is very familiar now to the way that we can refer to my notebook, which is @Devin Bayly, and then I named it name it whatever. So if there was really cool stuff going on in here, you could import it into other notebooks and sort of continue your progress elsewhere and modularize your work. Or you could find it by searching. I don't know if it's going to be uploaded already. Yeah, so it's not there yet, but it will be public. So now I'm going to unpublish this. It will only live on in, oh, my dog's woofing in his sleep. That's so sweet. We're going to move on to the experimental collaborative edit survey. So ideally, when Alex and I put this together, it was meant to be a method for, oh shoot, the chat. Thank you for handling stuff in the chat, Alex. Yeah, new notebook is in classic mode. Okay, and let's see. How to create at least one cell before you switch to next. I have to create one cell before you switch to next mode. What the heck? Really? That's so bizarre.
Yeah,
I don't know if
it's very disturbing.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if Devin, did you ever set there's like this experimental features thing in settings that I think I clicked a long time ago and forgot about it. And so every time you or I are opening a new one, it's just in next mode.
That might be where it's happening. Let's check that out.
That can do it, but I could be wrong. Okay, awesome. Good to hear.
Sweet. Okay. Experimental features.
So yeah, we're already making everybody auto-evolved advanced users that we're beta testing for them, I guess. But yeah, sorry about that.
That's funny. It's good to know. Thank you, Alex and Austin and Tom and Diane and everyone in the workshop, Chinmay and Kiri and John, doing some amazing help for me figuring out this funky platform. And let's see. So what we're going to try right now is, since we're also evolved, we're going to try to share this notebook with everyone. And I can't remember what the limit on the active users is, But let's see. If people can put in their whatever their username is, and just to sort of explain what that is, if you click on like your home icon underneath your name, there's this little at something. If you put into the chat your at something, I'm going to try to add you to our workshop notebook. And now this is a lot of power. Like you can totally trash this thing. So please hold on. Don't make any changes until I tell you what we're looking to do. Maybe Alex is so fast.
I don't think it's letting me add people, so this is going to be strictly you. Yeah,
Okay.
I know. Unless you could give me admin privileges somehow, but yeah.
So funky. I also am not able to add anybody. What is going on?
Does it only allow 2 collaborators?
That would be
Oh no.
Okay, well, we've got a bunch of names. What we might try is, I'm going to unpublish this really fast. That might have to do something with who's getting share privileges. Still no. Funky. All right. Clearly, this was a thing that we were going to try without a whole lot more testing. But all it was going to do for us was, we were hoping, and maybe Alex and I can demonstrate this. And if folks type in the, yeah, maybe we don't want to let all of us into the notebook, all sorts of crazy stuff can happen. Since we already have the chat where everyone is talking, what we're going to do is, this is our heartbeat moment. See where everyone is, how you're doing, whether you want to continue for any more time. So this is the requests period. Yeah, our little floating heads in a notebook. So if you could boil it down to a sentence or a single word, what you would like to see more of or to experiment with on the observable framework. See you later, Fernando. Please let us know. We're going to type this in, and it's going to create a sort of a live survey. As you can see, if we put in here, Alex has already erased my puppies vote, but now they're tied. So, oh shoot! All right. Well, Chinmai, I am so glad that you came along. And if at any point you're like, I want to go back into observable land, then we can chat. So now you see puppies is in the lead. So if anybody has like requests for what we want to work on, we'll type it into the survey, and we can sort of make that a fun little activity. And options could be, I know we've got some geospatial people hanging out with us. All right. Okay. So Kiri is asking, can we turn GeoJSON into a map? It's a great, great one. And what might be really nice is just to find an example of someone already doing that, and then we can, put your data right in there. And I've always wanted to do more stuff with, let's see, they've got this entire creative coding set of notebooks on here where they're using like WebGL for crazy effects and stuff like that. All right, and Diane Patterson and Tom Hicks. I don't know why I'm using first and last names for you two. Diane and Tom are game for anything. All right, so we need to evaluate it to start seeing our results. So this is probably pretty true, a little contrived at this point. And John is sort of up for anything, just listening. Cool. I like that. So I think that's it. That's us right now. Unless Austin wants to jump in and say something totally different. Why don't we work a little bit with Kiri's idea? Yes, showing off our bar chart is kind of an important step. So, Kiri, how might we get your data?
Oh, I don't know. I added just a random GeoJSON that I had to one of my notebooks. So can you take it from my notebook?
Yeah, let's see. I might have to show you how to make your notebook, or how you can share your notebook with us. So if you go up into this like 3-dot area, you'll see this little person icon, the
Yeah.
plus sign. And if you click on that, you can type in, for me, my name is Devin Bayly. So you do @Devin Bayly. Oh, maybe that was the issue. Is it the @ sign?
Yeah, I was testing out quirks, and that was one of the quirks I was testing. Like I could add a bunch of people, but if you put the @ sign, nothing ever happens. So you
That's
can add a bunch more than 2 people. You just can't do the @.
Oh my God, thank you, Austin. That's wonderful to know.
Okay. I added you to mine, Devin.
Woo! So exciting. All right, so I think I go to here and then share,
Yeah.
experimenting with modifications. All right, admin 1 US GeoJSON. Oh, I like what this is becoming already. Got this nice image. All right.
Where to go? Oh, right there. Sorry.
So I think I can see, is Kiri in here at the same time? I don't see the little link there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So this
Oh my goodness, how exciting.
It's gonna be crazy.
Floating heads.
Floating heads. So what I'm gonna do, and I love how in a collaboration setting, you can kind of say, I'm gonna work on this. If you work on this, then we can do it at the same time. I'm gonna look up Leaflet and just see if anybody has a notebook that's already set up for importing using Leaflet.
Tom, yes.
Probably go with this one, right?
Well, yeah.
So
any of them are fine.
Yeah, I like that. That outburst kind of made my day. So I will probably be bouncing back and forth between these 2 different notebooks, but what we are probably going to do, and we can maybe organize this thing later, because I'm not a super organized coder. That should be a thing that I get better at. We're going to import where they're defining Leaflet as a name cell from here. Now we have L, and as in some of the Leaflet code that I've been using, L is what you get whenever you bring in the actual library. And so in theory, the things that I'm used to doing are possible here now. And so what I also remember is that you usually have to have a container for your Leaflet thing. So we're going to make a div container. And I think we need to name it something that we can use later. And what's cool is that this, like if I put some text in here, it was like, you actually see this. This is an actual HTML div now. And we can refer to this thing from other places. So, oh wait, getting a little ahead of myself. Let's just leave it like that, and we'll use the ID to refer to this later. So quickly jumping over to Tom's example, the way that they're defining a map is the way that we're probably going to want to follow. And I think I remember the CSS file being really important too. So let's just copy that and put it in here too. And this backtick thing, again, is what I was telling you I really don't like about the previous way that they were doing observable. So we are going to evaluate this and change it to be HTML. And I'm going to just delete the backticks. Because I think if you're going to write HTML, you might as well just write it instead of like this stuff that's like around it. Feeling opinionated. But now we have to do some curly braces. And oh, I just noticed we should also name our data to be data. And since we have a couple different types of data, let's just name it map data. And this will give us the option, even though this cell is underneath where we're writing our code, we can refer to this thing map data as an actual variable that contains our JSON data. Let's also make sure that it comes in as JSON.
Can you remind me why that's the case in these notebooks?
It comes back to Alex's point about sort of dependencies on other things. So if we write map data anything in here, so I'm just gonna do sort of a really simple example of just going over our data. I guess we have to go over the features because that's what's actually an array. I forget what's in there. Let's just get, yeah, we'll take the type. We're just going to get a big long list of things that say feature, which is not that exciting. But so we use this thing, this name, map data, and that was originally created down here. And so when we try to execute this cell, like clicking the play button, observable in the back, which we're not looking at behind the scenes, sort of decides, oh, wait a minute, have we written this map data variable anywhere? And it looks through all of our content in the entire notebook, not just above where we're currently writing. And it says, okay, I did find somewhere that we have created it, and it uses that value. And of course, what's nice about that is if the opposite happens, where we change what map data is down here, it will go through the same process of checking everywhere that map data might have been used, and it will update those areas, as in they depend on this new value. So does that explain it?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so let's double check on what they're doing here. So this is the line that I'm the most used to. They use L, map, and then a reference to the actual element that is our container. And we're going to do it a slightly different way than they've written it. But let's do this. Maybe if Alex knows a better way to get access to the ID, since we didn't store it in a named cell. This is all I got.
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so L, map, and container. And I think Leaflet's a little funky about like how big you make your container. And so sometimes you think it didn't work and you just needed to make it like taller. So I hope that that's not going to happen right now, but it might. I'm also going to delete this area where I said, here's the contents inside of this, because it's going to mess with some of the stuff that we're doing. And I'm just going to style this right now up here in the actual, I'm going to set like an inline style on it for the height to be like 200 pixels. The width is automatically set to be 100 of whatever the cell is. 200 seems kind of small. Okay, so that's like a decent sized map. So now we can see that we're getting the leaflet stuff. There's just nothing in there yet. So it's working. It's exciting. And set view really zooms in on like what the lat long is that you care about looking at. And this final number here is the how zoomed in we are. Kiri, do we have a tile layer that we're going to use? I always forget which one is the, like Mapbox, you have to put in a bunch of other stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't know how you get Mapbox, but that's a OpenStreetMap one.
Yeah, OpenStreetMap is, I think, probably the best. But it's weird that they're not actually, we're not seeing the result of that OpenStreetMap being loaded. So I think maybe there's something still that's going to be a little different. Let me briefly look at, oh wait, is this going to pull up? Yeah.
I was literally just in the OpenStreetMap conference right before this, and some guy was talking about all the different tile layers that they have. And I don't remember what his website was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think it's no, let's actually go to the the page that I have for this. And I'm just going to look at the layer that I used. Oh no. Zoom chats are such an unwieldy thing, like getting them positioned in the right spot so you can still see everything. And then the debugger, let's just like look through. Oh no, it's gonna be this whole thing. What about on glitch? Is there like a good example of using the leaflet tile map on glitch?
Probably.
Yeah. Let's see, let's see. Yeah, because I remember one of the ones that they use in their tutorial, you have to like, make an account to actually get the tile layer. And I was like, what is this? View source. Oh, sweet. Let's just yank this. Oops. Okay. I think it doesn't like that we already had one of these. So one of the perks about how Tom is doing it in his code, every time they rerun this container or this cell, it creates a new div to put the stuff into. So I see a little bit about why they're doing that. It's smart. So we could just do this. I told you I wasn't going to, but I am. I'm going to use the dreaded backtick notation. And what that'll do is it'll actually give me like this div element as a JavaScript variable. So I don't have to reference it like this, but I better return it. Otherwise, we're not going to see anything. So there we go. Interesting. And I still don't see any tiles. But I didn't on their page either. I wonder if there's something going on. Okay, let's just like continue with our grabbing of other people's code. And it might have to do with where we are pointed. I'm not convinced about that actually. Tile layer, what is going on? I like that the captions knows I'm stumped. Yeah, why don't we actually provide a center? We can adjust this because I'm not actually sure where 45 negative 122 is. Might not be where we're hoping to put ourselves. But let's see, chat. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. So Diane was wondering, does it build layers before displaying it somehow? It really could. That could be what's going on, and that it's just taking a long time to build those layers before they display. But oh, okay, cool. Oh, Kira, I think you just saved us. I'll copy that out of the chat. Let's put it in here. Got sort of
obviously the only thing I know how to do is like copy other people's code, so I don't know if that solves the problem.
Well, you can see that I was doing kind of the same thing, so here we go. Let me paste in that. It might actually have to do with the order that we're making these things. Like I'm declaring the layer to be underneath it. In your code right now, they're actually doing layer above. In my mind, I don't want this stuff to actually matter, but it might. So let's take that out.
In In the code you were copying, I noticed there was something down at the very bottom that said like fit map to bounds or something.
Fit map to bounds. Oh, in Tom McWright's stuff or on this page?
In Tom McWright's, I think.
Oh, I see.
I have no idea whether that means anything.
It might. Although what I can tell you from the leaflet code that I've written, I have not used this function and have had success. So it's one of these, like, I can't tell if that's necessary for the observable context. So,
Shoot.
but it's the next thing to try, that's for sure. So, okay, so LMAP, got to put the container back. Let's try this. Stamen tile layer is not a constructor. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, I feel like I've used the toner one before. Let me see what's going on there. And I might have just been too hasty getting out of my my get example, because I know that it actually worked in here. So, oh, but I'm using tiles from like a U of A campus map. So it's a little different still. Let me log into my glitch, because I know I have an actual example of this. And thus begins the departure from observable to seek our fortunes elsewhere. And again, like, I know I'm teaching this workshop on it, but my general feeling about all of these things is that you should never be too much in love with any piece of technology. You should be ready to, like, abandon ship at all times. It's funny, I can't really tell which one of these is a leaflet anymore. Oh, wait a minute. I did have that other project, which was a much more straightforward. So I was looking for warehouses. I'm now living in a warehouse. Turns out kind of worked. And there we go. There's a tile layer. Let's see if this works for just a moment. And if it's not, then we will go back to these other examples. There we go. Da, da, da. All right, pointed at Tucson. I don't know where your data's actually from, Kiri, but yeah, party time.
I think it's like a all of the US.
Okay, so we're
Just like
probably
boundaries.
zoomed in. Higher is closer, so like let's do 5. I hope I didn't break it. Oh no. Oh, sigh. I think it could also, to some degree, have to do with my internet speed, because these tile layers are each individual images that you have to load. And maybe Diane's point about like the whole layer needing to be finished before could have something to do with the speed of this. But let's change this back to what, add 10 in here. Yikes. Just reload this page. Okay. All right, so the way that in Leaflet we put data on the map is they do something with like l.geojson. And again, I think I'm just going to open these two things side by side so that I can look at what I wrote before, and it will greatly improve everyone's experience of not watching me flail too much. So, so we have our data and we're calling it map data, and it's currently in the form of GeoJSON. And so what we're going to do is it's code in this section where we are going to, I guess I was performing a little bit of filtering on the data so that in the industrial warehouse search, I only looked at places that were light industrial, not like heavy industrial. So it didn't put me down at the airport or something. And here's the call that we're looking for. So we're going to do l.geojson, spelling JSON in caps. And instead of writing JSON, we're going to write map data. And now we're going to define this thing, which explains like what function is supposed to happen on each feature. And I think, Kiri, are these shapes or like points?
They're polygons, so they're like boundaries.
Oh, interesting. I don't think I've done much with that stuff. I might have to look up leaflet polygon drawing. Oh, or maybe they're just going to do it down here if I look a little further. LGeoJSON. Oh, okay. Well, we can just do add to map, apparently. If we don't have a specific thing that needs to happen on each feature, then we can maybe get away with it. I think we're gonna have to zoom out. Oh, yikes. Is this happening on your end too, Kiri? Where when we reload it, it like has a lot of trouble?
Oh, I'm just watching you. I can't keep up this fast.
Okay.
I did put a city of Tucson GeoJSON in the chat. Oh, look, that's
Here we
it though.
go. Guess it was geos around all of the states of our country.
Yeah.
So interesting. Very funky that like something's going on with this whole tile layer thing that I wonder if it has to do with this not being included in each reload of it. You can tell I haven't actually done anything with observable and leaflet yet, but it's fun to try stuff on the fly. So great, got some data on there. Of course, it doesn't have any like mouse events when you're hovering or any of that, but yeah. Were there other things you wanted to try with this, Kiri? Oh, city of Tucson. Let's check this out. The data. And then let's attach some more data to this notebook. Jurisdiction boundaries. What is this data, Kiri?
Oh, I think it's just like the city boundary and probably like South Tucson and I don't know what else.
Okay. Oh, no, after all that hard work, don't delete that. And I think what we can do is let's just make another variable that's this different data. Jurisdiction boundaries. Great, so now we have a named variable that we can reference. And the only spot we're actually using this, so we could make this into like a JavaScript function pretty easily, is in that GeoJSON loading step. So, but of course, it's not doing a very great job of tile layering when we reload the page. How were they doing this link thing before? So they had it. Oh, actually, here's the real test. Do their cells freak out if we run them multiple times? No, they don't. Okay. I am going to maybe follow some of their tricks of doing the yield. Essentially, what yield is doing is it's a lot like in Python where it will allow you to toss out a value when the function is called at one time, and then it'll allow you to do other parts of the function at a later time if it's called again. And since a lot of these observable displays are actually, they're on the browser, so they're animating potentially at like whatever frames per second the JavaScript request frame animation is asking for under the hood. So sometimes using a yield is actually necessary. They'll explain a little bit about this if you end up diving into parts of the user manual that get into how to do like, how do you slow down an animation? Like if you don't want it running 60 frames per second. So they'll actually show you it right here. But this stuff is getting into like more JavaScript than I tend to write. Like I don't really use a lot of like yields and promises in my stuff, but maybe that just means I'm not like a hardcore programmer for JavaScript. And if that's the case, I'm all right with that. But let's see if yielding the container fixes our issues. That means we don't return it down here. Okay, it's like we're getting, yeah, we can execute the notebook more times and not have it break. It's good to know. So I guess if we're learning anything here, it's good to actually use the code that other people give you, especially if they've gone to the work of making it for you. So yeah, look at all these bounded areas.
Yikes.
And yeah, we got a lot of jurisdiction going on. So I'm living around, I guess somewhere around here now. I guess we're recording this. I probably shouldn't like go into great detail. But let's see what else is in this data. We could choose to actually do a little bit of, this is going to push my leaflet knowledge pretty far. But if we had numerics, we could bring in D3 and then make like a color scale and use the colors for the fill of those geometries. Wait a minute, this is the Netflix data.
Devin, why did yielding the container fix the problem?
So what I think is going on is when I return the container, it gave the container only at one point in time.
Yeah, but wouldn't that give the container inside your callback? When you did the return before, wasn't it inside your callback?
It was at the very bottom of this. I'll just flat out say I don't know what the yield is totally changing, but I know that when they use yield in these other cases, it has to do with how quickly the screen is trying to update. So
if you put return container instead of yield container, would that screw up or would that work?
Over here?
Yeah.
What I think would happen is that the code would never get past these two lines.
Oh, yeah, I get you. Okay.
Yeah. But again, like why this is different than doing this is beyond me. And like why it should work the first time is also beyond me. I think it might have to do with something about observable and its ability to like decide when it really needs to fully update. And it tries to be smart and tries to like not keep your entire notebook from having to update at all times. And of course, any clever choices can always lead to issues. So yeah, let's see, interesting. Learning a lot of stuff in this workshop. Looking forward to doing leaflet stuff with you, Kiri, and Observable now.
I know this is good practice for doing this all over again for a map time workshop.
Yeah, this
We
is
can
dress rehearsal.
play with observable and glitch again and do whatever.
So let me see if I can't remember if there's a simple way to on each feature change. Whoa, some heat map stuff. What are they doing here? Oh, interesting. There's a heat layer plugin that they're pulling in and making use of. That's neat. Can we use that for, for anything in our data? this might, from a viz standpoint, be completely wrong to like, use like data that is strictly about areas with a heat map, which I tend to think about as like discrete points and how they add up together in aggregate. But maybe Alex can jump in on that.
This is this whole topic is a subject of recent research as well. It turns out discrete heat maps we're actually slightly better at perceiving discrete heat maps or discrete like color scales than, even though it's like subtracting data, you're actually better at perceiving them accurately, which is wild. Yeah, no, and it like counteracts all the conventional wisdom, and it's like, oh, everything we thought we knew about human perception is wrong. And
Oh no.
oh yeah, there's
The House
wild
of Cards
stuff,
is
wild
coming.
stuff in that question. So yeah.
All right. I'm glad that I poked the sleeping bear. Or the waking bear, the thrashing bear. So let's see, should I, let's stretch in the direction of, I'm going to look up in the code on Leaflet how they actually specify the fills. And
Evan, before you dive in this, Alex swore he would remind you of this, but can you reshare the ResBaz, the main ResBaz observable notebook?
oh yeah, let's pull that up again. And I think Alex might beat me to the link, but yeah, there it is. And again, that's in the HackMD as well, but this is a good place to find it again. So.
Right, but you unshared it.
Oh, I unshared it. You're right. Because, oh wait, I unshared something. I'm not sure if it was this one.
Well, I can't reload it again.
I think you unpublished it.
I
unpublished it. That's it. Okay.
Crazy. Oh, because wow, that was probably something. Oh yeah, when I was trying to experiment with the collaborative stuff, I was like, maybe it needs to be unpublished.
Right. It's back. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Good to get me to make that available again before it's all done. And yeah, it's essentially 4:56. It's a Friday. I guess here it's 4:56. I am gonna get ready to wrap things up, but it's gonna be hard for me to like stop messing around with Kiri's notebook. So I might try to do one last thing. I might give myself 3 minutes to do it, and then at that point, I'm going to say, everyone, you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you for all your questions. Of course, I'm going to say that again later, but I'm saying it now. And I hope you had a wonderful ResBaz. So let's get this thing going. So JSON. Yeah. Okay, so you can, I think, return something about this, and we would probably put in the D3 code right here. Like if we had a scale associated with some property of the feature, then we would update it this way. And of course, if you're crazy and you want to put pop-ups everywhere, you can do that too. But I'm just going to style. And then I'm going to call it quits. So let's get D3 in here. So D3, I usually put this at the bottom because you don't really need to see this. Oh no, I hit a button. Okay. Oh, D3's already here. Classic. So let's see, is this the notebook that we want to be using? So we're going to do this. Style. And then styles returning a color, right? Boy, I have gotten I got burned by the arrow function versus function stuff in D3 so hard that anytime in documentation where they're like, use the full word, I am very, well, at least I learned to do that. Because sometimes if you like were to just say like this, it could have serious ramifications. So I don't know why I'm going into that. I've only a minute left. Precious time wasted. So, and what are some of our properties? Here's this data. Oh gosh, I don't know how I'm gonna, maybe the object IDs we should change. Is there a categorical scale that or categorical thing I could put in here real quick? Oh, I always forget this part. Alex, help. How do I make that?
I saw the city names.
Oh, yeah, we could. Yeah. Okay. So like city CD might be.
Or city DS. There, yeah, city CD is probably like the shortened code for whatever the jurisdiction is.
Okay. So let's do this. Jurisdiction bounds features. So I'm going to create a little piece of our data that only has to do with this like city thing. And I think it's under E feature, or no, E properties, city DS. I can't remember if they had a space. No, they don't. Okay, so I'm already at 5, didn't make it. All right, so this would be the data that, why don't we actually do this outside of this cell so that I can like test it as I go and if I know it's right. So this would be, okay, all the places, they're clearly being repeats, but that's okay, because we can sort of uniquely pare it down. Oh, do I have my D3 API pulled up? I don't do enough with D3 that I have like all of their color scales on the tips of my fingers. Okay, categorical. Whatever, scheme 10. That seems fine. I forget how to use these. So this will be the moment where I like launch my body into space. And if Alex hasn't left the workshop yet, then he can be on me. Scheme category 10. Is this how I use this?
Yeah, yes, I think you can still do that.
Okay.
They changed the
I would
things
like-
with T3 versions, but yes.
Okay, and this is a function that I will use, like provide a value to categorical later, right? Like I do this, and then feature properties. I guess I didn't need that data that I was messing around with. It's all right. City DS. Did I balance my parentheses? Curly brace. Why does it have a problem with me?
I think it's, you've
Oh.
got the function in that, yeah, that thing.
Hopefully. Categorical is not a function. I just forget how to use these things. Or is it like a constructor where I have to do this and then now categorical is, nope.
Yeah, or no? Okay.
Show me the source.
I think, oh gosh, I think that's an older version of D3 that you could do scheme cat. I'll see if I can figure this out.
Yeah, I mean,
But we are definitely
we're
over
at time.
Yeah.
All right, and we've been recording. I don't want this to be like a terribly over 2-hour thing for people to watch. But like I said, I promised I was going to thank everyone for coming again, and I'm going to do that. So thank you for attending the workshop. I hope if you hadn't heard of Observable before, hopefully this has been sort of a wild ride through some of what it can do. And I can put my contact information in the chat, and you can find me in other places. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. And if you wind up using it and you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me and we can keep this thread going. And I think, this is the end of the conference. I hope you had a good time and learned lots and lots. And thank you for all of the people who have worked so hard on this thing. Like, we had quite a few helpers in this workshop today who I know have been like tirelessly working all week. Yes, and send Alex questions too. But I hope all of you have a wonderful weekend. And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you made it. Take care, everyone. Be safe out there. And I will probably see you at some point in the future because we're all around. All right, bye-bye. Stop the recording.